Hey everyone, tonight's story takes us to Madrid. Not the glamorous city of today, but the dusty streets of the early 1900s. No Bernabeu, no Cristiano, no Champions League anthem echoing across Europe. Just a group of young men with an English leather ball, dreaming of something new. This is the story of Real Madrid, a club that began humbly, almost quietly, and grew into a name so powerful the Champions League itself seems to bend towards it. Before we dive in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these journeys through football's past. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always amazing to see Madridistas and their rivals joining from every corner of the world. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights, maybe let that quiet night air in through the window. It's 1902, and a new century has just begun. A group of brothers, the Padros family, sit in a small cafe in Madrid. They dream of starting a football club, not just to play a game, but to bring a growing city together. Their idea is simple, but their ambition is enormous. They call it Madrid Football Club, and within a few years, it will carry the royal crown of Spain and eventually the crown of Europe. Simply a group of students in Madrid with one football, a patch of ground, and one big idea. The year was 1902. There was no Santiago Bernabeu yet, no Cristiano Ronaldo, just a handful of young men, most of them academics, who loved the game enough to carve out their own little club in the heart of Spain's capital. They didn't even call it Real at first, just Madrid Football Club. The royal blessing would come later. And here's the funny thing. The club that would one day dominate Europe, that would terrify giants and collect trophies like souvenirs, was nearly crushed before it began. Political turmoil, wars, even the threat of their stadium being destroyed. There were moments when Real Madrid looked less like an empire and more like a fragile experiment. But somehow, through stubbornness, vision, and a few very important men who refused to let go, Madrid survived. And not only did they survive, they became something bigger than football itself. A club so big that even their rivals admit Real Madrid isn't just a team, they're an idea, a symbol, a powerhouse, the team of kings and the kings of Europe. In 1920, something remarkable happened. King Alfonso XIII, Spain's monarch, granted the club royal patronage. He gave them the title Real, meaning royal. In one stroke of a pen, Madrid went from a student's hobby to a team with the king's blessing. A crown was literally added above their badge. The boys, who once struggled for legitimacy, now carried the weight and the privilege of royal approval. It was like a fairy tale twist. Imagine starting a garage band, and then suddenly the king shows up, nods approvingly, and says, "From now on, you're not just any band. You're the royal band." How could anyone ignore you after that? And so Madrid Football Club became Real Madrid. Their destiny was no longer a flickering candle in the wind. With the crown above their crest, the story had only just begun. If the crown in 1920 gave Madrid their royal title, the 1920s gave them something even more important, their first taste of glory. Picture it. Madrid, a city alive with jazz spilling from cafes, bullfights drawing crowds, politics simmering beneath the surface. In the middle of this restless city, Real Madrid was slowly turning into more than a pastime. They began to win. In 1905, they had already claimed their first Copa del Rey, but now the 1920s made it clear these weren't just enthusiastic amateurs anymore. They were a team with ambition. By the late 1920s, Spanish football was organizing itself into a national league, La Liga. Suddenly, clubs from across Spain would clash regularly to prove who was best. It was in 1929 that the first La Liga season kicked off, and Real Madrid was there, ready to carve out their place in history. And they didn't just survive. They nearly conquered. Real Madrid finished second in that very first La Liga season, behind Barcelona. Already, the seeds of a rivalry were being sown. Barcelona versus Madrid, Catalonia versus the capital, passion versus power. Nobody knew it yet, but this was the beginning of one of the fiercest rivalries in all of sport. But glory never lasts long without shadows. The 1930s brought darkness not just for Real Madrid, but for Spain itself. The country fell into chaos as the Spanish Civil War broke out in 1936. Stadiums became battlegrounds, players were forced into hiding or exile, and the very fabric of Spanish football threatened to unravel. For Real Madrid, survival became the only goal. Matches were canceled, seasons disrupted, finances ruined. The club that had just begun to taste glory found itself teetering on the brink of extinction. In those years, the roar of crowds in the stadium was replaced by the echo of gunfire in the streets. Yet even in the middle of this storm, Real Madrid endured. It wasn't glamorous, it was grit, stubbornness, and sheer survival. While other clubs collapsed or faded, Madrid clung to life. By the time the war ended in 1939, Spain was scarred, broken, and under dictatorship. But Real Madrid still stood. And here lies the intrigue. No one quite knew what would become of them. Would they remain a flicker of the past or rise to define football's future? The 1940s would bring a rebirth. A man named Santiago Bernabeu was waiting in the wings, ready to turn survival into empire. Now, Bernabeu wasn't just some outsider parachuted in to fix things. No, he was Madrid through and through. To Madrid fans, he wasn't a businessman or a politician. He was one of their own. But by the 1940s, Bernabeu had traded boots for vision. And what a vision it was. When he became club president in 1943, Madrid was still licking its wounds. Money was scarce, infrastructure was wrecked, and rivals were better organized. Bernabeu had Madrid in his blood. He'd joined the club as a teenager, played as a striker, and even scored in a Copa final. He wasn't the flashiest, but he was relentless, and fans admired his fire. When his playing days ended, he stayed close, working odd jobs for the club, coaching, organizing, even carrying water bottles when needed. He wasn't just part of Real Madrid, he was Real Madrid. Bernabeu looked around at the mess and decided, fine, if we're going to rebuild, we won't just patch up the cracks. We'll build something so big, so audacious, that nobody will ever question Real Madrid's place again. First, the stadium. The Chamartín, Madrid's old ground, was too small and too modest. Bernabeu dreamed of something absurdly bigger. People thought he was mad. Spain was still struggling with rationing, and here was this man talking about a football palace for 75,000 fans. Critics mocked it. But Bernabeu pressed on, calling in favors, finding money where there was none, and pushing the project through. Rival fans laughed at first. Why build a stadium that big? You'll never fill it? It was like building a castle in the middle of a village. But Bernabeu wasn't building for today. He was building for tomorrow, for the dynasty he believed Madrid could become. Step 2, talent. Bernabeu knew a great stadium meant nothing without great players. He set about professionalizing the club, scouting harder, recruiting smarter, and making Real Madrid a destination rather than a stepping stone. By the late 1940s, Madrid was back in the mix, lifting the Copa del Rey in 1946 and starting to reestablish itself as a contender. And third, perhaps most importantly, Bernabeu set a tone. He carried himself with the air of inevitability. To him, Real Madrid wasn't just another football club. It was destiny. Fans who were used to disappointment suddenly had a leader telling them, quietly but firmly, "We are going to be the best." And when someone believes that fiercely, it's hard not to believe it too. And in the late 1940s, as Spain limped back to normality, that idea sounded almost ridiculous. But Bernabeu had planted the seed, and seeds, given time, grow into empires. The 1950s would prove it, for waiting just around the corner were two names that would change football forever: Alfredo Di Stefano and Ferenc Puskás, the Galacticos of their day, legends in white. But first, Real Madrid needed to take its next step into the European stage. The 1940s gave Madrid its home, but the 1950s gave Madrid its crown. And the man at the center of it all was Alfredo Di Stefano. Now, Di Stefano's arrival wasn't simple. In fact, it was messy, political, and downright chaotic. He was a superstar in Argentina, dazzling crowds with his skill, stamina, and intelligence. Barcelona wanted him. Madrid wanted him. Even governments got involved. For a while, it looked like he might play for both clubs. Half the games for Barca, half for Madrid. Can you imagine? But in the end, Bernabeu pulled off what many still call the greatest signing coup in history. Di Stefano became Madrid's, and with him, everything changed. Di Stefano wasn't just a striker. He wasn't just a midfielder. He was everywhere. He could score, defend, pass, run endlessly. He was like having three players rolled into one. With him on the pitch, Madrid stopped being fragile and started looking inevitable. And then came Ferenc Puskás, the Hungarian genius, part of the legendary Mighty Magyars, arrived later in the decade after fleeing political turmoil in his homeland. Puskás was older, heavier, and many doubted him. But once he pulled on the white shirt, his left foot silenced everyone. Goals poured out of him like water from a fountain. Together, Di Stefano, Puskás, and their teammates created something Europe had never seen before: dominance on a continental scale. Because in 1955, a brand new competition was born: the European Cup, the tournament that would later become the Champions League. Clubs from across the continent gathered to decide who was truly the best. It was risky, experimental, unproven. Some doubted it would even last. Real Madrid didn't just win the first edition in 1956. They won the next one, and the next, and the next, and the next, 5 in a row. From 1956 to 1960, Real Madrid made the European Cup their personal kingdom. The highlight came in 1960 at Hampden Park in Glasgow. Real Madrid faced Eintracht Frankfurt in the final. It wasn't a match, it was a masterpiece. Madrid won 7-3, with Di Stefano scoring a hat-trick and Puskás adding 4. Even neutrals in the crowd admitted they were watching the greatest team in the world. The highlight came in 1960 at Hampden Park in Glasgow. Real Madrid faced Eintracht Frankfurt in the final. It wasn't a match, it was a masterpiece. Madrid won 7-3, with Di Stefano scoring a hat-trick and Puskás adding 4. Even neutrals in the crowd admitted they were watching the greatest team in the world. For rivals, it was despair. For fans, it was ecstasy. For football, it was the dawn of the super club. And remember that stadium people mocked Bernabeu for building? Too big, too ambitious, too ridiculous? Well, now it was full. Overflowing, even. Madrid wasn't just filling seats, they were filling imaginations across Europe. By the end of the decade, Real Madrid had gone from a team that once fought for survival in civil war to the undisputed kings of Europe. But dynasties don't last forever. And as the 1960s dawned, change was coming. New rivals, new challenges, and the question of whether even Madrid could keep the crown forever. Every empire, no matter how golden, eventually discovers gravity. For Real Madrid, the 1970s were a slow descent from the dizzying heights of Di Stefano's era. The trophies didn't vanish overnight, but the invincibility did. Europe, which once trembled at the white shirts, began to catch up. Ajax, Bayern Munich, Liverpool, they weren't just beating Madrid, they were rewriting the rule book. At home, Madrid still collected league titles like kids collect stickers, often enough to stay respectable. But in Europe, suddenly they looked ordinary. And if there's one thing Madrid hates, it's being ordinary. The once mythical Santiago Bernabéu himself passed away in 1978, leaving behind not just a name for the stadium, but also an uncomfortable question. Who are we without the men who built us? It was the kind of moment where even the most loyal fans start looking nervously at the horizon. Then came the 1980s, a decade remembered in football for wild perms, short shorts, and tactical chaos. For Madrid, it was the decade of searching for identity, for heroes, for that missing edge. They won 5 leagues in a row between 1985 and 1990, which sounds incredible on paper. But here's the twist. Europe kept saying nice try and slamming the door, and yet inside Spain, something beautiful was brewing. 5 young men emerged from Madrid's academy, La Fábrica, and they weren't just good, they were magnetic. They became known as La Quinta del Buitre, the Vulture's cohort. Why the Vulture? Because their leader, Emilio Butragueño, had this uncanny knack of circling defenders, waiting, then swooping in for the kill. Around him were Sanchis, Martín Vázquez, Michel, and Pardeza. Each one a piece of Madrid's soul stitched back together. They weren't mercenaries bought from abroad. They were homegrown, born in the club's veins. Together, they dominated La Liga. 5 straight titles, dazzling football, comebacks that felt scripted in Hollywood. The Bernabeu roared like it hadn't since the days of Di Stefano. Fans joked that you didn't need a ticket. You just needed a strong heart, because Madrid were masters of the late rescue. But Europe remained the cruel mistress. Time and again, Madrid's dreams crashed against the likes of Milan, Juventus, or PSV. The Quinta could rule Spain, yes, but Europe? It was as if the continent had placed a big neon sign on Madrid's locker room that read, "Come back later." Still, something important had shifted. The club had rediscovered joy, rediscovered its voice, and rediscovered its future. Because sometimes, before you conquer the world again, you need to remember how to conquer your own backyard. Madrid had risen once more in Spain, and soon, very soon, their hunger for Europe would grow unbearable. The 1990s were, in many ways, a strange in-between decade for Real Madrid. Domestically, Barcelona under Johan Cruyff were rewriting Spanish football with their dream team. Camp Nou glowed with free-flowing football and a smugness that could be felt all the way to Madrid. For real fans, it was torture. Every season felt like watching your noisy neighbor throw a party while you're stuck at home listening through the wall. Madrid, of course, didn't disappear. They still won league titles, still produced drama, still kept their aura. But the European Cup? That old friend had abandoned them for more than 3 decades. 32 years without lifting the trophy that had practically been invented for them. For a club obsessed with Europe, it was like an itch that never went away. Every season ended with the same question: when? And then came 1998, the stage. Amsterdam Arena. The opponent? Juventus, a machine of a team led by Zidane. Yes, that Zidane, who would later swap allegiances. Madrid weren't favorites. In fact, some people quietly whispered they'd be lucky not to get steamrolled. But this is Real Madrid. If history has taught us anything, it's that the club saves its loudest roars for when they're counted out. That night, Predrag Mijatovic etched his name into legend. One scrappy, looping, awkward but beautiful goal was enough. Just like that, after 32 years, Real Madrid were kings of Europe again. The drought was over. The obsession had been quenched. The trophy that had slipped through their fingers for a generation was finally back in their cabinet. And here's the kicker. Madrid, being Madrid, they didn't stop to enjoy it for too long. The victory sparked something bigger. A hunger not just to win, but to dominate. Club president Lorenzo Sanz, emboldened by the triumph, pushed for more. He wanted stars. He wanted glitter. He wanted Galacticos. By the end of the decade, the seeds were planted. Figo, Zidane, Ronaldo, Beckham, they weren't here yet, but the vision was forming. The idea that Madrid could be more than just a football club, that they could be a global spectacle, a traveling circus of the world's greatest names. The 1990s, then, were both an ending and a beginning. An ending to the long, painful wait for European glory. And the beginning of a new era, where Madrid's ambitions would stretch beyond the pitch, into branding, stardom, and the very definition of what a super club meant. For Madridistas, it was a reminder of an old truth. No matter how long they wander, Real Madrid always comes home to Europe. Once upon a time, Real Madrid were already giants. But in the early 2000s, they decided being giants wasn't enough. They wanted to be celestial. They wanted stars. And not just stars on the pitch. They wanted supernovas. It all started in the summer of 2000 with one of the most infamous transfers in football history. Luis Figo, Barcelona's golden boy, their captain, their soul, the man who wore the Blaugrana like it was stitched to his skin. Until Florentino Perez came along. Florentino wasn't just running for president of Real Madrid. He was campaigning like a politician. His promise? If elected, he'd bring Figo to Madrid. People laughed. Barca fans scoffed. But Perez wasn't joking. He had a plan, a release clause, and a mountain of cash. It sounded impossible, like saying you'd borrow your neighbor's car, permanently. Figo was adored in Catalonia, the heartbeat of Barcelona, until one day he wasn't. Perez paid the release clause, Figo switched sides, and the football world stopped breathing for a moment. And so it happened. Figo crossed enemy lines, from Barcelona to Madrid, from hero to traitor. Camp Nou erupted in fury, literally. When Figo returned wearing white, the pitch was showered with insults, boos, and, most famously, a pig's head. Yes, someone hurled an actual pig's head at him. It was the most grotesque fruit basket in football history. But in Madrid, Figo's transfer was a declaration. We can sign anyone. They weren't just signing footballers. They were bending football's reality. From there, the Galacticos project snowballed. In 2001 came Zinedine Zidane, a balletic midfielder with the vision of a painter and the composure of a monk. His transfer from Juventus broke the world record. His price tag? Astronomical. His impact? Priceless. A year later, in the 2002 Champions League final, he wrote his masterpiece. A looping ball fell toward him on the edge of the box. Zidane waited, twisted, and volleyed with his weaker foot. The ball flew like a comet into the top corner. One swing, and Real Madrid lifted their 9th European Cup. But Madrid weren't done. 2002 also brought Ronaldo. not Cristiano. We'll get there. This was the original, the Brazilian phenomenon. Ronaldo Nazario. He arrived from Inter Milan, a man who had conquered injuries, critics, and defenders with equal ruthlessness. His debut at the Santiago Bernabeu, he scored twice in less than 30 minutes. Talk about making an entrance. And then, because why stop when you're winning? Madrid added David Beckham in 2003. He wasn't just a footballer, he was a brand, a global phenomenon, a poster on millions of bedroom walls. His arrival transformed Madrid into a pop culture juggernaut. From Tokyo to Los Angeles, the Bernabeu had become the center of the universe. Together, they were called the Galacticos. Not just a team, a galaxy. A constellation of the brightest stars in football. Every weekend, the Bernabeu became a stage. Cameras flashed, journalists swarmed, and the world tuned in. The players were more than athletes. They were icons, idols, household names. And yet, as dazzling as the stars were, the cracks soon appeared. Coaches struggled to manage so many egos. Defense? Often an afterthought. While the attack glittered, the backline sometimes looked like it had been borrowed from a Sunday league side. By 2004, the results began to wobble. There were highs, of course. That famous night at Old Trafford in 2003 when Ronaldo scored a hat-trick so beautiful that even Manchester United fans gave him a standing ovation. And there was the 2003 La Liga triumph, where the Galacticos proved that glamour and grit could, for a season, coexist. But there were also lows, trophyless seasons, shocking defeats, coaches fired mid-season. Madrid often looked less like a football club and more like a luxury car with 3 steering wheels. Expensive, shiny, but very hard to drive. But there were also lows, trophyless seasons, shocking defeats, coaches fired mid-season. Madrid often looked less like a football club and more like a luxury car with 3 steering wheels. Expensive, shiny, but very hard to drive. Still, for all the chaos, the Galacticos era did something remarkable. It transformed Real Madrid into more than just a successful club. It made them a global phenomenon. For millions of kids around the world, their first memory of football wasn't a scrappy local match. It was Zidane's volley. It was Ronaldo's hat trick. It was Beckham's hair. The Galacticos may not have won as much as they should have, but they changed what football could be. They proved that a club could be both sport and spectacle. And even when the trophies dried up, the myth only grew stronger. Because sometimes greatness isn't measured just by medals, it's measured by memories. And the Galacticos created memories that still glitter like starlight decades later. By 2007, the Galacticos were fading. Zidane had retired after the 2006 World Cup. Ronaldo had been sold. Beckham left for Los Angeles. What had once been a glittering constellation was now a scattered sky. Real Madrid still had money, still had history, but they lacked something crucial, an identity. The mid-2000s were frankly messy. Presidents came and went, coaches came and went faster. The club burned through managers like they were single-use lighters. Fabio Capello, fired after winning La Liga. Bernd Schuster, gone. Juan de Ramos, a brief cameo. Madrid were still winning occasional league titles, but in Europe, disaster. Year after year, they were dumped out of the Champions League at the round of 16. To put that in perspective, Lyon were Madrid's bogey team. Lyon. Not Barcelona. Not Bayern. Lyon. Madrid, the kings of Europe, couldn't get past France's second biggest club. Meanwhile, across Spain, a storm was brewing in Catalonia. Barcelona weren't just good, they were redefining football. Pep Guardiola's team, led by a certain Lionel Messi, played a brand of football that was so smooth, so suffocating, it felt unfair. They didn't just beat opponents, they hypnotized them. By 2009, they won the treble. In 2011, they embarrassed Madrid in the Champions League semi-final. Even Sir Alex Ferguson admitted after losing to Barca in the final, "They're the best team I've ever faced." For Madrid, this was humiliation. The kings of Europe had become clowns at their own party. Something had to change. And in 2009, Florentino Perez returned as president. Round 2. If his first era had been about stars, this one would be about redemption. He opened his wallet like it was an Olympic sport. That summer, he spent a staggering 250 million euros. Cristiano Ronaldo, Kaká, Karim Benzema, Xabi Alonso. It was a shopping spree that made even Manchester City look frugal. And let's be real. The headline was Cristiano Ronaldo, signed for Manchester United for a then world record fee of £80 million. He arrived at the Bernabeu like a rock star. 80,000 fans turned up just to watch him wave. No ball, no tricks, just waving. That's how hungry Madridistas were. Cristiano delivered immediately. Goals, goals, and more goals. Thunderous free kicks. Gravity-defying headers, shirtless celebrations. But as brilliant as he was, there was a problem. Barcelona still existed, and Messi was entering his prime. The rivalry between Messi and Ronaldo wasn't just football. It was cultural. It was ideological. Messi, the quiet prodigy, raised in Barça's academy, team first, humble to a fault. Ronaldo, the self-made superstar, a machine sculpted by ambition, obsessed with proving he was the best. For a decade, they pushed each other to superhuman levels, but for Madrid, the rivalry was painful. Between 2009 and 2012, Barcelona dominated. Guardiola's side won La Liga after La Liga. In 2011, they destroyed Madrid 5-0 at the Camp Nou. It wasn't just a defeat, it was an exorcism. Bernabeu pride lay in ashes, and yet Madrid didn't give up. In 2010, they hired Jose Mourinho, the special one, the master of siege mentality. If Guardiola was the philosopher, Mourinho was the general. He didn't care about aesthetics. He cared about winning. He built a Madrid team that was direct, ruthless, sometimes brutal. Parking the bus? Maybe. But that bus had rocket launchers. In 2012, it worked. Madrid stormed to 100 points in La Liga, a record at the time. They scored 121 goals. Ronaldo alone netted 46. They broke Barcelona's stranglehold. Mourinho had given Madrid their swagger back, but in Europe, heartbreak. 3 consecutive semifinals, 3 painful eliminations. In 2012, they lost to Bayern Munich on penalties at the Bernabeu. Cristiano, usually ice cold, missed his kick. The stadium fell silent. It was the cruelest reminder that Madrid could dominate Spain. But Europe remained elusive. By 2013, Mourinho was gone, worn down by politics, press wars, and dressing room mutinies. Madrid turned to Carlo Ancelotti, the calm after the storm, a player's coach, a man who could balance egos without setting the place on fire. And under him, something clicked. The squad had matured. Benzema was now the ultimate team striker. Luka Modric, once dismissed as a flop, had blossomed into a midfield magician. Sergio Ramos, the eternal warrior, had become a leader. And Cristiano was no longer just great, he was inevitable. The stage was set for 2014. The Champions League final in Lisbon, Real Madrid versus Atletico Madrid, city rivals, one chasing history, the other chasing destiny.
Atletico, under Diego Simeone, had just won La Liga with grit, fury, and defensive walls thicker than a bank vault. They wanted to complete the dream with a European crown. The squad had matured. Benzema was now the ultimate team striker. Luka Modric, once dismissed as a flop, had blossomed into a midfield magician. Sergio Ramos, the eternal warrior, had become a leader, and Cristiano was no longer just great. He was inevitable.
The stage was set for 2014. The Champions League final in Lisbon, Real Madrid versus Atletico Madrid. City rivals. One chasing history, the other chasing destiny. Atletico, under Diego Simeone, had just won La Liga with grit, fury, and defensive walls thicker than a bank vault. They wanted to complete the dream with a European crown. For most of the final, it looked like they would. Atletico scored first. Madrid pressed, attacked, begged for an equalizer. Time bled away. By the 90th minute, Atletico was still leading 1-0. Madridistas in the stands were crying. The curse was real. La Decima, the mythical 10th European Cup, was slipping away again. And then, Sergio Ramos. In the 93rd minute, Luka Modric swung in a corner. Ramos rose like a man possessed, hung in the air, and thundered a header into the net. 1-1. The Bernabeu didn't just erupt, it detonated. Madrid had been dead and buried. Ramos dragged them back to life. Extra time was carnage. Atletico collapsed. Gareth Bale scored. Marcelo scored. Cristiano, of course, scored, ripping off his shirt to reveal abs carved out of marble. The final whistle blew. 4-1. Real Madrid were champions of Europe again. La Decima was theirs. The curse was broken, the obsession fulfilled, and in that moment, Madrid didn't just win a trophy. They reclaimed their crown as kings of Europe. The decade of pain, the years of humiliation, the endless comparisons to Barcelona, all of it dissolved in the Lisbon night. Because at Real Madrid, patience isn't rewarded, glory is. If La Decima in 2014 felt like destiny fulfilled, what came next was something nobody, not even Madridistas, in their wildest dreams, could have scripted. Winning one Champions League is hard. Winning 2 in a row is nearly impossible. Winning 3? That belonged to fairy tales and FIFA video games. But Real Madrid don't live in reality. They bend it. After Lisbon, Madrid finally looked settled. Carlo Ancelotti had built harmony. Cristiano was still scoring like a man with a personal vendetta against goalkeepers. Bale, Benzema, Modric, the orchestra was in tune. Yet, in classic Madrid fashion, peace never lasts. In 2015, after a trophyless season, Ancelotti was sacked. Out went the calm professor. In came Rafa Benitez. On paper, it made sense. A Spanish coach, tactical, disciplined. In practice, it was oil and water. Benitez's methods clashed with the stars. His cautious style grated against the club's DNA. Within months, it was over. Enter Zinedine Zidane. Yes, that's Zidane. The bald magician who had volleyed Madrid to Champions League glory in 2002. Now, in January 2016, he was stepping into the dugout with almost no managerial experience. It was a gamble, maybe even reckless. But Madrid had a habit of gambling big and winning bigger. Zidane wasn't a tactician in the Mourinho sense. He wasn't a philosopher like Guardiola. What he had was aura. When Zidane walked into a room, legends listened. Ronaldo listened. Ramos listened, because how do you argue with a man who had done it all? And somehow, it worked. In 2016, Zidane guided Madrid to the Champions League final in Milan. Their opponent, Atletico Madrid. Again. The match was brutal, tense, suffocating. Madrid scored first. Atletico equalized. Extra time came and went. Penalties. Cristiano Ronaldo stepped up for the final kick. He scored, ripped his shirt off again. At this point it was tradition, and Madrid claimed their 11th European crown. La undécima. Zidane had managed half a season and already had a Champions League. But he wasn't done, not even close. In 2017, Madrid achieved the impossible. They defended their Champions League title, the first club to do so in the modern era. The final in Cardiff was Ronaldo's masterpiece. 2 goals against Juventus, cementing his status as the man who lived for finals. Madrid won 4-1. Bale scored. Asensio scored. Ramos lifted the trophy like it was routine, but the real magic was in the numbers. That season, Ronaldo scored 10 goals in the knockout rounds alone. He didn't just break records, he devoured them. By 2018, people were whispering, could they do it again? A three-peat? Surely not. Surely football wouldn't allow it. And yet, Madrid marched back to the final. Their opponent? Liverpool, a team on the rise under Jurgen Klopp. Fast, fearless, ferocious. The final in Kiev began with calamity. Mohamed Salah, Liverpool's superstar, was injured after a tangle with Sergio Ramos. The stadium erupted in boos. Liverpool fans cursed Ramos for years after. And then came the strangest hero of all, Gareth Bale. He didn't even start the match. But when he came on, he scored one of the greatest goals in Champions League history. An overhead kick so outrageous, so acrobatic. It looked like something you'd only try in your backyard before falling flat on your face. The stadium gasped. Zidane didn't even celebrate. He just raised his arms like a conductor hitting the perfect note. Madrid won 3-1. Bale scored twice. Karius, Liverpool's keeper, had a nightmare. And when the dust settled, Real Madrid had done the impossible. 3 Champions League titles in a row. La duodécima, la decimotercera, back to back to back. This wasn't just dominance. It was dynasty. In 4 years, Zidane had delivered 3 European Cups. Cristiano Ronaldo had cemented himself as the king of the Champions League, with more goals than some entire clubs had in the competition. Ramos had become immortal. Modric had become a Ballon d'Or winner. No team had ruled Europe like this since the 1950s. Since the days of Di Stefano and Puskas. Madrid had resurrected their own mythology. But as always with Madrid, glory carried a price, because soon the cracks would show. Zidane would leave. Cristiano would leave. And the dynasty, like all dynasties, would face its end. If 2018 was the height of the empire, what followed was the morning after. The cruel hangover. You know the kind. The champagne's gone, the lights are too bright, and someone's asking, who's cleaning up this mess? It started in Kiev, just moments after lifting their 3rd straight Champions League. Zidane, calm as ever, sat down at the press conference and casually announced, I'm leaving. Wait, what? The man who had delivered 3 European Cups in 3 years walked away like it was nothing. He said the team needed a new voice. Madridistas felt like kids whose dad had just popped out for milk and never returned. But the real earthquake came a few weeks later. Cristiano Ronaldo, Mr. Champions League himself, packed his bags for Juventus. 9 years, 4 Ballon d'Ors, and 450 goals. Gone, just like that. The timing was brutal. Madrid had lost their captain on the sidelines and their general on the pitch. What followed was chaos dressed as football. First came Julen Lopetegui. His story was tragicomic from the start. Spain's national team coach at the World Cup, secretly negotiating with Madrid, only to be fired by Spain 2 days before the tournament. Madrid unveiled him like a prize catch. By October, he was gone. The low point? El Clásico. Barcelona 5, Real Madrid 1. Lopetegui looked like a man watching his house burn down while holding an empty bucket. Next came Santiago Solari. He brought some stability, promoted Vinicius Jr., gave the team energy. But stability in Madrid is like a sand castle in high tide. Solari didn't last either. And then, with no one else to call, Florentino Perez picked up the phone. Zidane was back. Yes, less than a year after leaving, the bald magician returned. Madridistas greeted him like a hero, but the reality was tougher. Ronaldo wasn't there to save them anymore. Bale was in and out of favor, more interested in golf than goals. Injuries piled up. The team looked lost. 2018-2019's ended with Madrid finishing third in La Liga, crashing out of the Champions League in the round of 16, thrashed by Ajax at the Bernabeu no less. It was humiliation. For a club that had just conquered Europe, it felt like waking up in a stranger's house after a wild night and realizing your wallet's gone. But through the rubble, something was shifting. Karim Benzema, long in Ronaldo's shadow, started scoring like a man possessed. Youngsters like Vinicius showed flashes of promise. The dynasty was gone, but the seeds of a new chapter were quietly being planted. And in 2020, with Zidane guiding them once again, Madrid clawed back La Liga in a pandemic-stricken season. No fans, empty stadiums, but Ramos and Benzema led the charge. It wasn't the Champions League, but it was proof. Madrid weren't finished. They never are. The hangover had lasted long enough. The Kings were stirring. If the hangover years felt like Madrid stumbling around in the dark, 2021 was when they found the light switch. And what followed was pure theater. If the hangover years felt like Madrid stumbling around in the dark, 2021 was when they found the light switch. And what followed was pure theater. Zidane had finally stepped away again. In came an old face, Carlo Ancelotti, the gentleman with the raised eyebrow, back for a second spell. His return felt like putting on a favorite old coat. Warm, familiar, maybe a little worn, but always reliable. The league campaign was steady. Benzema blossomed into a leader, scoring goals with a swagger nobody had seen since Ronaldo left. Vinicius Jr., once raw and erratic, suddenly exploded into stardom. Dribbles, goals, samba flair. Madrid won La Liga comfortably, but that wasn't the real story. The real story was Europe, the Champions League. Their path looked doomed from the start. Paris Saint-Germain in the round of 16, Messi, Neymar, Mbappe, the most glittering attack in the world. For 150 minutes, Madrid were dead. Down 2-0 on aggregate, outplayed, outpaced, outclassed. And then something snapped. In the space of 17 minutes, Karim Benzema scored a hat trick. 17 minutes. PSG collapsed like a house of cards in a thunderstorm. The Bernabeu roared back to life. Madrid were through. Next up, Chelsea, the defending champions. At Stamford Bridge, Benzema again destroyed the script. Another hat trick. In the second leg, Chelsea came storming back, scoring 3 to lead the tie. The Bernabeu fell silent. But then Luka Modric, the little Croatian wizard, produced one of the greatest assists ever. With the outside of his boot, he bent the ball across the sky into Rodrigo's stride. Goal, lifeline, extra time. Benzema struck again, Madrid through, and then the semi-final. Manchester City, Pep Guardiola's machine. The first leg in Manchester was chaos. City 4, Madrid 3, breathless. In the second leg, City controlled everything. By the 89th minute, Madrid were done. Out. Finished. Fans were leaving. Even the commentators sounded ready to write the obituary. And then, Rodrigo. 2 goals in 2 minutes. The Bernabeu erupted like a volcano. From despair to delirium in 120 seconds. Extra time. Benzema wins a penalty. He scores. Madrid advance. Guardiola stared into the distance, looking like a man who'd just seen a ghost. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was Madrid. The final in Paris was almost calm by comparison. Liverpool threw everything at them. Shots, crosses, relentless pressing. But Thibaut Courtois played the match of his life. Save after save after save. And when Vinicius Jr. tapped in the only goal, Madrid had done it. La decimocuarta, the 14th European crown. A run so unbelievable it felt like destiny had been scripted by a mischievous playwright who loved drama and hated predictability. Benzema lifted the trophy, now hailed as a Ballon d'Or winner-in-waiting. Courtois was man of the match. Ancelotti became the first manager to win 4 Champions Leagues. And Madrid, once again, stood alone at the summit of Europe. This wasn't dominance like the three-peat. It was survival, resurrection, magic. The kind of campaign that turns football into folklore. Because that's what Real Madrid do. Just when you think they're gone, they rise, and not quietly, never quietly, always with fireworks. The champagne from 2022 hadn't even gone flat. Yet already Madrid faced the question every great dynasty dreads. Can they do it again? This was the season where the crown sat heavy. The Champions League was theirs to defend, the league theirs to chase. But the magic of the previous spring, those late miracles, those impossible comebacks, couldn't be bottled twice. Still, there were sparks. Vinicius Jr., now no longer the apprentice, started looking like the heir. Federico Valverde thundered down the pitch with the lungs of 2 men. And lurking up front was Karim Benzema, the captain, the quiet killer, the Ballon d'Or winner. But this was also the beginning of goodbye. His body betrayed him more often than before. The goals were still there, beautiful, decisive, elegant, but fewer and harder earned. Madrid didn't collapse, though. Far from it. They lifted the Copa del Rey, their first in nearly a decade. A domestic trophy might not have the shine of Europe, but for Madridistas, it was a reminder, even in transition. Silverware never strays too far from this club. In Europe, however, the magic ended. Manchester City, the very team they had stunned a year earlier, returned with a vengeance. At the Etihad, Guardiola's side swarmed Madrid like a tidal wave. For once, there was no escape act, no Rodrigo miracle, no Modric sorcery, just the sound of a dynasty being tested, maybe even ending. And when the season closed, the final curtain dropped on Benzema's era. 14 years, 5 Champions League titles, and more goals than even Madrid fans dared count. He walked off not as a star fading quietly, but as a king who had ruled with grace. It was the end of an era and the start of a question. Who would lead Madrid into the next one? For Madrid, history never waits. One legend leaves, and another is expected to arrive almost instantly. In 2023, that another was Jude Bellingham. He wasn't Spanish, he wasn't Brazilian. He was a teenager from Birmingham, England, polite off the pitch, ruthless on it. Madrid didn't just buy a midfielder, they bought a statement. The future is already here. And almost overnight, he became the heartbeat. Those long strides, that composure beyond his years, and the knack for showing up exactly when Madrid needed him. Fans had barely learned to chant his name before they were screaming it weekly. The Bernabeu, freshly rebuilt into a steel and glass cathedral, became his stage, and what a stage it was. In the league, Bellingham dragged Madrid forward with goal after goal, many of them arriving in those cruel stoppage-time moments when opponents thought they'd done enough. He had that rare gift, not just scoring, but making every strike feel like destiny. Around him, the next generation blossomed. Vinicius Jr. and Rodrigo sharpened into true stars. Valverde's engine never stopped. Camavinga and Tchouaméni added steel. It was no longer the team of Cristiano or Benzema. This was the new Madrid. Young, hungry, fast. The reward? La Liga wrestled back from Barcelona with swagger, and in Europe, Madrid marched again, though the Champions League slipped away at the semi-final stage. But by then, the message was clear. This wasn't decline. This was a reload. Carlo Ancelotti, the man with the calmest eyebrows in football, looked around and smiled. His squad wasn't just surviving a transition. They were sprinting through it. By the end of 2024, Madrid felt inevitable once more. And with Mbappe's shadow always lurking in transfer rumors, the thought lingered. If this is what the kids can do now, what happens when the next Galactico finally walks through that door? But behind the warmth, there was conflict. Carlo's contract was ticking down. Rumors swirled of Brazil. Was this his last dance? Madrid played on. They won, they stumbled, they fought. Bellingham's goals kept hope alive. And Toni Kroos, methodical as ever, kept ticking the ball as though powered by invisible gears. Madrid could have rested. They could have polished the trophy, swept the confetti, and said, enough. But Madrid does not rest. They hunt. And in the summer of 2024, they caught the most hunted man in football, Kylian Mbappe. After years of drama, near signings, and endless rumors, the Frenchman finally pulled on the white shirt. Other clubs might have panicked about wages or locker room balance. Madrid only smiled because they knew what was happening. Another Galactico era was quietly being written. Now, Madrid didn't just have Bellingham and Vinicius, they had Mbappe, speed, power, stardust. The Bernabeu wasn't just rebuilt in concrete, it was rebuilt in dreams. The night air over Chamartin sits quiet, but the Bernabeu hums anyway. Steel ribs, bright skin, roof tucked in like a secret. Inside, The grass sleeps below ground in its greenhouse cradle. This isn't just a stadium anymore. It's a theater, a workshop, a money machine with a view. And tonight, someone new is walking into the director's chair. He arrives without fuss, no parade, no megaphone. Just a calm stride and the kind of stare that once split midfields in half. Xabi Alonso, former conductor of Madrid midfields, takes the touchline like it's an old room he used to live in. He knows where the light switches are. He knows where the pressure points sit. A few days before, the club had done something rare, ending a great love story on purpose. Carlo Ancelotti, king of calm, whisperer of finals, collector of nights you tell your grandchildren about, shook hands, lifted his famous eyebrow one last time, and left as the most decorated coach in Madrid's long, crowded trophy cabinet. 15 pieces of silver, 15 proof points that football, for all its chaos, sometimes rewards the steady hand and the steady eyebrow. He didn't leave a mess. He left a platform. Alonso steps onto it with the same economy he used to play with. He doesn't speak in slogans. He speaks in distances and angles. The squad listens. They shift up 5 yards. They close gaps sooner. The press has a countdown now. Triggers like alarm clocks that jolt all 11 at once. Within weeks, the numbers whisper a truth fans can see with their own eyes. Fewer shots against, more recoveries high, a cleaner, meaner Madrid. The old velvet glove now has a steel lining. Danny Carvajal, soldier, survivor, right back with miles in his boots, says it out loud. A cycle ended. Fresh sap is in the trunk. You feel it in the rhythm. Training loads nudge up. Video sessions run long. Lines tighten. It's still Madrid. Still jazz when it needs to be. But there's a metronome under the melody now. There's also a new chess piece down the right. Trent Alexander-Arnold walks in with a different kind of English swagger, all diagonals and daring. Madrid don't do either or at right back. They do both depending. Some nights it's Carvajal's grit. Some nights it's Trent's geometry. And sometimes it's the magic trick, where one becomes the other in the 70th minute and the game flips on its head. The joke writes itself. Real Madrid saw a gap and decided to sign a passing lane. Liverpool fans might prefer not to laugh. Overhead, the Bernabeu shows off. Roof sliding shut with a sigh. 360-degree halo flickering to life, the sound crisper than a winter apple. And the club is candid about it. This place is a future factory. Matches on weekends, concerts midweek, events that spin the turnstiles and refill the war chest. Not romance, you say? Oh, but it funds romance. The 93rd minute goals. The impossible comebacks. The next generation of heroes who cost what they cost and then earn back twice as much in memories. Through it all, the characters stay vivid. Bellingham still glides like a number 10 painted by an engineer. Vinicius still plays tag with gravity. Rodrigo still sneaks into back posts like a magician stepping through curtains. Around them, Valverde's engine, Chouameni's shield, Camavinga's restless feet. Alonso's trick is not to smother their improvisation, it's to lower the noise so the solos sound even brighter. And because this is Madrid, the season doesn't gently welcome him. It throws him into fire and paperwork. A summer tournament here, a league opener there, the press already counting passes allowed as if they were pearls on a string. Early read, organized, disciplined, a touch less chaos, a touch more control. The team learns when to hunt and when to hide the ball, when to let Vinicius dance, and when to have the whole orchestra stand perfectly still until the opponent breathes out. Then they steal the breath. He inherits something else, too. Expectation with a capital E. In this city, third place is a rumor and second is a scandal. You don't just coach Madrid, you calm Madrid. It helps that Alonso, by temperament, by posture, by voice, radiates the exact kind of stillness that makes crowded places quiet. There's a subtle comfort in seeing a former midfielder manage this midfield. Like the circle finally closing, the handover is neat, but not frictionless. Let's be honest. Transitions bruise. Some will miss the old rhythms, the late-game lullabies Ancelotti used to sing from the touchline. Some will argue about Trent versus Danny until their cafe con leche goes cold. Some will wonder if a higher press fits a squad trained on rope-a-dope miracles. That's the fun of it. That's the friction that makes sparks. And yet, there's a certainty here that's bigger than any one tactic. Real Madrid has a habit of landing on its feet. Change comes, the crest remains, and somewhere in the 88th minute of a tight night, someone in white does something that bends probability into a pretzel. The club doesn't promise titles. It promises the chance to chase them like no one else. Outside, the city glows. Inside, the new Bernabeu keeps whispering its sci-fi lullaby, a stadium that can swallow its own pitch and spit it back greener, a roof that zips the sky shut, a scoreboard that wraps the building like a bracelet. The future is not a distant thing here. It's plugged in, powered on, already taking bookings. On the touchline, Alonso folds his arms and watches the lines move just so. The ball rolls. The press bites. The crowd leans forward together, one organism in white. Somewhere in that sound, you can hear both farewells and first steps.